4 men walked out of a patrol base in Sangin at 1:15 in the morning with no vehicles, no helmets, and less combined equipment than a single Marine carries on his back. 94 minutes later, they walk back in with a 5th man, cuffed and barefoot, and the dawn operation that 130 Marines had spent 3 days rehearsing was cancelled before breakfast. This is what happened in between. Staff Sergeant Kyle Decker is sitting on a HESCO barrier outside patrol base Wishen, armour still on, rifle across his knees. 28 years old, from Beaumont, Texas, a photograph of a daughter he's held exactly once tucked into the pouch over his heart. He cracks his knuckles, left hand, then right, the same small ritual he ran through in Ramadi, in Marja, and every patrol brief since. 11 days into this deployment, his platoon has already medevaced 3 men. 2 to buried devices, 1 to a round through the pelvis fired by someone nobody saw. He doesn't crack his knuckles because he's nervous. He does it because it's the last thing that still feels like routine. Tonight, he's watching something he doesn't have a name for. 4 men are getting ready to leave the wire. Not a squad, not even a fire team, 4 men. And they move with an economy that looks like carelessness until you watch long enough to see it's the opposite. No helmets. Plate carriers slim to a single front plate and a single rear plate. Pouches so flat they look empty. No rucksacks, no machine gun, no radio anyone can hear, just small earpieces and a whisper mic against the jaw. One of them, older, with a stillness bordering on strange, finishes a mug of tea, sets it down on a sandbag with the care of a man setting down something fragile, and picks up a carbine short enough to pass for a submachine gun. The 4 of them walk to the gate. Nobody says goodbye. No formation, no radio check, no engine idling to carry them anywhere. They walk into the dark, and the dark takes them whole in about 4 seconds. Decker turns to the Marine next to him. What the hell was that? 12 hours earlier, in the operations centre at Forward Operating Base Inkerman, 2 kilometers north, Captain Aaron Mosley, 32, Annapolis legacy, his father, a Navy captain before him, was briefing his platoon commanders on Operation Hammerfall. The target, a compound in Wishen East, 900 meters south of the patrol base, where a bomb maker named Rahim Jan had been working the district for weeks. He built the circuits, he drew the maps, he told the emplacers where to dig. In 3 weeks, his devices had killed or maimed 14 Marines. Mosley's plan was textbook, and textbook for a reason. 2 platoons cording, a 3rd breaching, a pair of Super Cobras overhead, an AC-130 on call, 8 MRAPs, a Reaper providing continuous overwatch, casualty evacuation staged and ready, 130 Marines, a 12-page operations order, rehearsed and war-gamed twice. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, had already buried too many of its own to take Rahim Jan any other way. Mosley believed in mass, in armour and firepower, standing between his men and every footpath in the district that wanted to kill them. Then the SAS liaison came in, a quiet major with no visible rank, a voice like he was ordering coffee, and said that a 4-man team from B Squadron 22 SAS would be conducting a deliberate detention operation against Rahim Jan that night, and that before dawn they'd like access to the Marine drone feed. That was the whole ask. Mosley didn't lower his voice. He didn't need to. It was his room. 4 guys in Sangin at night with no vehicles. That's not an operation. That's a missing persons report waiting to happen. Tell the Brits we'll leave a light on for them. 2 of his lieutenants laughed. The major didn't. He nodded once, said it was appreciated, and left. Mosley wasn't a cruel man, and he wasn't wrong by the only math he'd ever been given. In Sangin, small units died. The ground said so, the 14 Marines said so. His contempt had been carved into him by the dead. That night, 4 men with no helmets, no vehicles, and a combined equipment load lighter than one Marine's rucksack walked into the most dangerous square kilometer in Afghanistan. 94 minutes later, they walked out and the dawn operation was cancelled. At 2200, Patrol Base Wishan held both units at once for the only time in the deployment, and the contrast was visible from across the courtyard. On the Marine side, pre-combat checks ran loud and familiar. Corporal Nate Rosales, 24, Tucson, a machine gunner, opened the feed tray on his M24 OB and kissed it the way he did every time, then checked headspace and timing a 3rd time that day, loaded the gun and its ammunition pushed close to 40 pounds before he added armor, water, radio, rations, and a sidearm. His patrol load for the dawn assault would run 97 pounds. He stood 5'9", every ounce of it existed for a reason, written in someone else's blood. The armor, because fragmentation was real. The machine gun, because at 60 meters suppressive fire was the difference between dying in a ditch and fighting out of one. 30 meters away, in a room that used to be a goat pen and still smelled like it, 4 SAS operators prepared in near silence. The team leader, Taff, a warrant officer, real name never learned by a single Marine on that base, sat on an ammunition crate drinking tea from a battered steel mug, studying a hand-drawn sketch of the target compound that he'd burn before stepping off. 38 Welsh, 17 years in the regiment, built like a distance runner who could also carry a man over a wall. Sergeant Danny Harlan, 34, from Burnley, taped a green filtered penlight to his forearm. A £2 piece of kit that had never once failed him in 7 years of night work. A scar ran across the back of his left hand, a breaching charge that had gone wrong in Baghdad in 2005. Under his plate carrier, he wore a civilian hiking compass on a lanyard alongside a GPS he trusted less than the compass. The youngest, Trooper Jake Elliott, 26, from Poole, first attempt selection, ran a function check on a suppressed carbine with a barrel shorter than most men's forearms. Next to the Marines' rifles, it looked like a toy. 11 seconds, start to finish. Then he sat still, which seemed to be his resting state. Decker watched from the doorway and turned to Rosales, not quite quietly enough. What the hell are they carrying? My Rakin Ramadi weighed more than all 4 of those guys combined. He wasn't far off. The whole patrol's total load, 4 men together, ran somewhere near 140 pounds. Decker alone would carry 97. At 01:30, Taff finished his tea, set the mug on the sandbag and looked at his men. Same as before, in through the soft side, don't rush it. If he's not there, we walk away and try again Thursday. That was the entire brief. A 4th operator, never introduced, stood at 01:45, and the 4 of them walked to the gate without a word and vanished into the dark inside 4 seconds. The alleys of Sangin closed around them like a throat. Harlan took point, flipped down night vision that turned the absolute black into granular green-white phosphor and read the ground instead of trusting it. The compounds loomed mud-walled and thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Irrigation ditches cut across the alleys every 30 meters, forcing a rhythm. Step down, cross, step up that would have worn out a less conditioned team inside the hour. They weren't rushing. They were reading. Harlan navigated by compass, not satellite. In alleys, this narrow and walled, GPS lost the resolution to tell one compound from the next. A handheld needle and a paced count found the gap between two walls that a $12,000 receiver couldn't. Dogs barked everywhere in Sangin, at nothing and at everything, and the patrol used the noise as cover, moving between barking sequences, freezing when one started close, advancing when it faded. The same ammonia smell that meant fertilizer or bomb hung thicker here, where the irrigation ditches fed both the crops and the devices. Back at Wishan, Decca stood on the command post roof, scanning a darkness that had already swallowed the patrol whole. In the operations room below, 3 screens carried the Reaper feed, grainy infrared from 18,000 feet, flown by a crew 6,000 miles away in Nevada, tracking 4 small white shapes drifting through a maze of walls. To the Marines watching, the movement looked disorganized. It was the opposite. Every pause was a listening halt, every doubling back a route clearance. They were reading sound, not light, the way a blind man reads a page with his fingers. Gunnery Sergeant Ray Pacheco, 36, 18 years in, San Diego, watched the screen without a word. He'd seen enough to know that what looked like wandering usually wasn't. He just didn't know yet what it was. At 0210, 600 meters out, a compound door swung open 40 meters ahead of the patrol, and yellow lamplight spilled into the alley. A man stepped out and walked directly toward them. 4 operators stood single file in a space barely a meter wide. No doorway to duck into, ditches at their backs. Taft's voice came through bone conduction, 2 words. "Stand still." 4 men froze, weapons up, night vision glowing. The man closed the distance, 30 meters, 20, 15, carrying a jug, headed for a communal pump because the water ran cooler at night and the line was shorter. At 7 meters, he stopped and looked straight up the alley. Through his own eyes, in near total dark, there was nothing there. 4 men in blackened faces and camouflage stood within arm's reach of him. He held there 5 seconds that felt considerably longer, then turned and went back inside. The door closed. On the Reaper feed, the Marines watched it as 4 white shapes and a 5th closing in. A pause, then the 5th retreating. Rosales, who'd wandered into the ops room to watch, exhaled out loud. How did he not see them? Pacheco, eyes still on the screen, he was looking for people, not statues. At 0219, the patrol reached the final approach, a dense knot of compounds where the alleys ran roofed over in places with beams and straw, tunnels the drone couldn't see through. The Reaper watched 4 white shapes walk into one and vanish, $40 million of airframe and sensor staring at a mud roof. The screen showed nothing. Moseley, who'd come in to monitor, looked at the blank feed and then at Pacheco. Neither man said anything. The silence in that plywood room, with the coffee that had been burning on the hot plate for 7 hours, had weight to it. Outside, Rosales sat behind his 240B, barrel trained south, told not to fire unless the SAS radioed a single code word. He hadn't heard it. His finger stayed off the trigger. He could hear his own pulse. What the drone couldn't see was happening in near total silence at ground level. The patrol had split into 2 pairs. Taff and Harlan approached the target compound's south wall. The soft side, no windows, no door, 18 inches of dried mud facing away from the village centre. Elliot and the 4th operator looped east to cover the only exit. Harlan pressed an ear to the wall. A television inside A Pashto language broadcast, one male voice speaking low. He held up a single finger. One voice, confirmed. Taff keyed the radio. 3 words. Elliot, set, go. The east gate was corrugated steel on a welded frame held by a padlock hasp screwed into dried wood. Elliot didn't kick it or blow it. He worked a modified crowbar into the gap and applied steady pressure until the screws tore free with a sound like paper ripping. 8 seconds, tool to open gate. On the south wall, Harlan cupped his hands, boosted Taff over, and followed using the same handholds he had already mapped through his night vision. 12 seconds, approach to both men inside the courtyard. The television sound came from a ground floor room, door swollen shut in its frame, barred from inside. Harlan tried the latch. It didn't move. Elliot's suppressed carbine came up, 1 round, no louder than a hand slapping a table, placed into the drop bar exactly where it's seated into the bracket. The bar splintered. Harlan pushed the door open. 12 feet by 10, mud walls, a rug, a television flickering in the corner, and a thin man in a grey shalwar kameez sitting on a sleeping mat with wire-rimmed glasses and a stack of papers beside him. Rahim Jan, no weapon in the room. Taff crossed it in 2 steps, put a hand on his shoulder, pushed him face down onto the mat. Harlan had flexed cuffs on his wrists in 4 seconds. The man never made a sound. His eyes stayed wide open. Elliot moved through the room fast. Under the mat, a cheap mobile phone. Behind the television, a laptop wrapped in plastic. On the shelf, folded inside a copy of the Quran, a hand-drawn map with Pashto notations. He didn't know it yet, but what he was holding in his hands would keep people alive who hadn't been born into danger yet. 13 minutes inside, 0234 to 0247, methodical the whole way. Harlan photographed the room, the papers, the mat, the exact spot where Rahim Jan had been sitting. Elliot bagged the phone, the laptop, the map. The 4th operator held security in the courtyard. Rahim Jan walked out through the east gate barefoot, cuffed, silent, with Taff's hand on his shoulder, guiding rather than shoving him. A man who isn't panicked doesn't shout. A man who doesn't shout doesn't wake the street. That wasn't mercy, that was tradecraft. Extraction ran the same route in reverse. Harlan on point again, with the compass out, pace fractionally quicker now that they had what they came for, but only fractionally. Still freezing at every closed bark, still pausing at every junction. At 0305, the Reaper picked them up again, 4 white shapes and a 5th walking between 2 of them. In the ops room, every Marine leaned toward the screen at once. Rosales caught movement in his own night vision at 300 meters, thumb moving toward the safety until his earpiece crackled. Friendlies inbound your position from the south, 4+1. His thumb came off. His hand was shaking, and not from fear, from the sheer size of what he was rearranging in his head. At 0319, the gate opened. 4 men walked in with a 5th, barefoot, cuffed, blinking in red flashlight glow. Decker was there. Rosales was there. A dozen Marines who couldn't sleep were there, standing in a loose half circle, watching. 94 minutes, step off to return. 0 shots fired, 0 casualties either side. 1 high-value target taken alive. A phone, a laptop, a map. The 130 Marine operation, planned for dawn, cancelled. Mosley stood in the operations room, replaying the drone feed, watching the cuffed man led to a holding area. He didn't say anything. Nobody cheered. There was no film moment for it. Gunnery Sergeant Pacheco stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said it to the room rather than to anyone in particular. 18 years in this corps, I've never seen anything like what just happened. Nobody argued with him. Rosales found Decker on the roof afterward, his voice cracked in a way that suggested he was still rearranging his own understanding of what was possible. We were sitting here talking about how they were going to get themselves killed, and they walked back in carrying his phone, his laptop, his maps. 4 guys, 90 minutes. I need to rethink my whole career. Decker didn't answer right away. The stars were still out. Sangin was still Sangin. His knuckles still ached. Inside the goat pen, the debrief took 4 minutes. Taff asked each man one question. Anything different next time? Elliot asked later how a 4-man team had cleared in 15 minutes what a Marine platoon had been tasked to assault at first light, gave the only answer that mattered. We knocked. No celebration. Harlem put the kettle on. Elliot stripped and cleaned his weapon. The 4th operator went to sleep. Outside, the sky started to lighten, and the call to prayer drifted thin and warped across the compound walls and the grape furrows, and across the 11 devices still buried in the ground that would be found and cleared that same day because of a map drawn on notebook paper at 2:30 in the morning. In the weeks that followed, 2 things changed. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, stood up a formal liaison protocol with the SAS task force in Helmand, where before the 2 had operated in parallel with almost no coordination. Moseley sat down with the same major he'd dismissed, and this time asked real questions. How do you navigate without reliable satellite fixes? How do you train for a civilian encounter mid-approach? What's your abort trigger? The major answered all of them. Moseley wrote the answers in a green logbook and never repeated the joke about the missing persons report. Separately, Marine Corps Special Operations Command quietly requested a briefing on the SAS detention methodology. It arrived at Hereford 6 weeks later. What was in it has never been made public. 3 weeks after the raid, Marines from the same battalion detained another member of Rahim Jan's cell during a cordon and search operation. Questioned at Camp Bastion, he said something that made it into the file, translated almost word for word. We knew when the Americans were coming. You could hear the vehicles from 2 kilometers. You could see the drones. The sound is like a mosquito that never lands. We had hours to prepare or to leave, but the ones who come at night, we call them the quiet ghosts. No warning, no sound. The door opens and they are already inside your room before you know they've come. Rahim Jan was taken from his own bed. His guard was asleep in the next room and didn't wake until they were gone. A separate intercept picked up the following morning read simply, Rahim Jan is gone. The house is empty. No one heard anything. Do not sleep in the same place twice. Months later, in a different district, a captured Taliban squad leader put it another way during questioning. The Americans fight like a storm, loud, powerful. You can survive a storm if you know it's coming. The British ones fight like a sickness. You don't know you're infected until it's already too late. The phone from Rahim Jan's compound yielded 47 contacts. Those contacts fed 11 further operations across northern Helmand over the next 4 months. The laptop's wiring diagrams were folded into counter-IED training back at the Royal School of Military Engineering. The hand-drawn map led to the safe disposal of all 11 devices it named within 48 hours, every one of them found, and not a single one ever detonated. Not one Marine ever stepped on any of them. Kyle Decker finished that deployment with a battalion that buried 25 of its own before it rotated home. Back in the States, he put in for assessment and selection with Marine Special Operations Command. He told his wife It was because of one night in July when he watched 4 men walk into the dark and come back 94 minutes later carrying everything that mattered. Mosley finished his command tour with Lima Company and never discussed that night publicly. Marines who served under him afterward noticed his operations orders started including a section they'd never seen before: Special Operations Integration, Alternate Approaches. Taff, Harlan, and Elliot kept serving with B Squadron through the end of British combat operations in Helmand. Their names never appear in any public record, and their ranks may well have changed since. Their methods haven't. There's a man in Hereford now, in a building with no sign over the door, who still tapes a green-filtered pen light to his forearm before he goes to work. He hasn't needed it in years. He does it anyway.